I'd like to call the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, February 16, 2023 to order. We can all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Manager Francis, if you would please call the roll.
Certainly. President Ballerini.
Here.
Trustee Evans.
Here.
Trustee Gallegos.
Here.
Trustee Clarity.
Here.
Trustee Marshazga.
Here.
Trustee Hannan.
Here.
Trustee Pollock.
Here.
Village Attorney Lance Molina.
Here.
Also present, Village Manager Francis.
Thank you. First on the agenda tonight is the President's report, and I have the pleasure of asking for a motion to confirm the appointment of Tom Orgler to the Economic Development Commission. Tom has had over 40 years experience in marketing and direct advertising. He had spent the last 2 years on Riverside TV. His true love was economic development. So I asked him if he wanted to move over to economic development since we had an opening, and it's going to be a great blending between economic development and Riverside TV since they work so close together. So if I can have a motion and a second.
So moved.
A motion by Trustee Gallegos, second.
Second.
Second by Trustee Marshazga. Manager Francis, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Clarity.
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Motion carries. Second is to confirm the appointment of Gary Zeleny to Riverside TV. Gary, not to be outdone by Mr. Orgler, has 41 years in the TV business. He is a videographer or a cameraman for WFLD, Fox News. He's been doing that for many, many years, and he is going to bring his expertise to Riverside TV. If I can ask for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Motion by Trustee Gallegos, second.
Second.
Second by Trustee Marshazga. Manager Francis?
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Clarity.
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Motion carries. I appreciate both these gentlemen coming forward to give their time and expertise to the Village of Riverside. We move on to our manager's report.
I do not have a report this evening.
Okay. We move on to resident comments for non-agenda items.
Thank you. I had hoped to say this 2 weeks ago, but I forgot to tell President Valerie that I wanted to comment. I want to congratulate the board for approving the transit-oriented development zoning code update, and hopefully tonight the sign code update. It's really significant improvement. It'll go a long way to modernizing our current code to the benefit of residents, business owners, visitors, and hopefully new residents and business owners, while protecting our landmark status. As chair of the steering committee for this project and chair of Planning and Zoning Commission, I wanted to acknowledge some people who really put a lot of time into this. So it was in 2018 when former Community Development Director Abt applied for this RTA grant. So it's been 5 years in the making. And when it was approved in 2019, Manager Francis says, this is no cost to the village except for staff time. And oh boy, has it been a lot of staff time. So I'll start there. Director Abt, interim director, I can't remember what her term was, Kashima, right?
Courtney Kashima,
Courtney
yes.
Kashima. AVM Monroe and Planner Siren. I mean, the two of you got dropped into this project halfway through or at the tail end, and you didn't miss a beat. You didn't miss anything. It was a tremendous amount of work that you put into it, so thank you. I'd like to thank Michael Horsting from RTA, who started this grant process, the steering committee, myself, Trustee Pollock, Commissioner Hennigan, and Jeff Cermak helped get things started with our consultants, both Todd Vanadalak, I never pronounced that one correctly, and Con Savoy. And then it went to PZC, and over at least 6 meetings, we discussed it. We had public hearings. We had hours and hours and hours of meetings. They were long nights, but that's because the commissioners were paying so much attention to detail, and bringing their creativity to it, that we're able to take all that time to go through every line over and over again to make sure that what was proposed really does fit Riverside. So my thanks go to the commission, and now my thanks go to you guys tonight. So thank you. It's a big lift, but really important for our community.
Thank you, Ms. Mateo, and thank you for all the work and that you've taken on this. It's been, like you say, a long time, so we appreciate your dedication. Is there any more comments from the public? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. Manager Francis.
Thank you. Approve voucher list of bills, February 16th, 2023. Approve Village Board of Trustee regular meeting minutes, February 2nd, 2023. Review and file Parks and Recreation Board regular meeting minutes, November 28th, 2022. Review and file January Police, Fire, and Public Works monthly reports. An ordinance authorizing the adoption and publication of the official updated zoning map of the Village of Riverside. A resolution authorizing the sale or disposal of personal property owned by the Village of Riverside. A resolution waiving competitive bidding and authorizing the village manager to enter into various purchase orders for fiscal year 2023. I wanted to make a note that there was a Scrivener error. The number reflected on the agenda is $35,568. The resolution in the packet is accurate, and it is $33,568, so it should read, a resolution authorizing the village manager to waive competitive bidding and issue a purchase order for the not-to-exceed amount of $33,568 to PPG Architectural Finishes, Inc. for the purchase of a sidewalk grinding system. A resolution authorizing the village manager to waive competitive bidding and issue a purchase order for the not-to-exceed amount of $38,711.58 to Halloran Equipment for the purchase of a battery-powered zero-turn commercial-grade mower and charging system.
Thank you, Ms. Francis. Do any trustees or public ask for any of these items to be removed? Okay. Hearing none, if I can have a motion
Motion made.
and a second.
Second.
Motion by trustee Gallegos, second by trustee Marshaga. Ms. Francis?
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Clarity.
Aye.
Trustee Marshaga.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Motion carries. Thank you. We move on to the board, department, board, and commission reports. Are there any reports this evening? Okay, hearing none, we move on to pending business. An ordinance approving accommodation for construction of a fence in the Woodside Road Street Yard 148 Maplewood. Planner Siren.
Yes. Good evening. At the February 2nd meeting, the village board voted to allow the proposed fence in the street yard as a reasonable accommodation for the homeowner's child under the ADA. The three conditions the board approved have been added to the ordinance, which is the fence will be 4 feet tall, the fence must be removed at the applicant's expense when the child is no longer a full-time resident at the property, and a copy of the ordinance shall be recorded by the village against title to the subject property.
Are there any questions for Planner Siren? Yes, Mr. Pollock.
Question for staff. I just want to confirm that the document will be recorded before we issue a fence permit.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Ms. Marshaga?
I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to be clear on the record that I will not be voting in favor of the ordinance.
Okay.
And the legal standard for the ADA accommodation under the Fair Housing Act is whether it's necessary for the disabled person's full enjoyment of the premises. And in this case, both of the applicant's children, the hearing impaired and the non-hearing impaired child, have full use and enjoyment of the yard as it is without a fence. And the real issue I find here is the parents' comfort level. They would prefer not to have to supervise their children and their dog in the yard, and the fence would give them that peace of mind. But that's not what the standard is. It concerns me that we would try to shoehorn a result through the ADA and Fair Housing Act when we have the opportunity to address the safety question head-on. We can lower the speed limit to 20 all the way in from 31st Street. Planning and zoning could consider a text amendment allowing the fences in the street yards on corner lots and certain streets if a hearing establishes that unsafe conditions outweigh our interests in preserving the Olmsted aesthetic of open space. Both of these are more targeted approaches to the real situation at hand than what is happening in this ordinance that's before us tonight.
Thank you, Trustee Marshaka. If I can have a motion and a second.
I'll motion.
Motion by Trustee Clarity, second.
I'll second.
Second by Trustee Hannan. Any further discussion? Hearing none. If you can please call the roll.
Trustee Evans?
No.
Trustee Gallegos?
Aye.
Trustee Clarity? Aye. Trustee Marshazga?
No.
Trustee Hannan?
Aye.
Trustee Pollock?
No.
President Ballerini?
Aye. Motion carries. Move on to B, an ordinance amending section 10.6.3, temporary use as it pertains to accessory structure. Planner Siren.
Thank you, sir. The proposed ordinance would define temporary event tents as being different than temporary storage tent and create standards for temporary event tents. If you look at page 127 in your agenda, which is attachment C, it includes a table listing the standards for temporary event versus temporary storage tents. A few points to note, the permit would not be required for a temporary event tent, but they would be required to meet all applicable building and life safety codes. Temporary event tents could only be up for 7 consecutive days and up to 30 days total per calendar year. And a temporary event tent could be put up in a street yard if the zoning administrator determines that having it in a rear or side yard is impractical.
Is there any questions for Planner Siren? Hearing none, if I can entertain a motion and a second.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Trustee Gallegos, second.
Second.
Second by Trustee Marshaka. Any further questions? Hearing none. Manager Francis?
Trustee Evans? Aye. Trustee Gallegos?
Aye.
Trustee Clarity? Aye. Trustee Marshazga?
Aye.
Trustee Hannan?
Aye.
Trustee Pollock?
Aye.
Motion carries. We move on to letter C. Is C still applicable, or was that going to be
So
pulled?
my understanding is that the applicant for C had indicated to staff that if the ordinance that just was voted on passed, they would withdraw their application.
Okay,
And so since it's deemed withdrawn, there needs to be no action taken on it.
okay. So we move by C. On to letter D, resolution adopting the Village of Riverside communication policy. Manager Francis.
Thank you, President Ballerini. On page 157 of the board packet, you'll find my agenda history sheet along with Ethan Soul. We worked on this collectively with the village attorney providing us feedback, and based on the feedback that the board previously provided, we have changed where certain specifications as it relates to guidelines of non-municipal communications versus the information intended to inform residents and so on and so forth. I won't go through it line by line. You'll notice in the summary and purpose, we specifically carved out the village's website. E-Flash and Riverside Review newsletter communications are to be exclusively utilized for municipal services, messages, and events based on the feedback at the last board meeting. And then we grouped, for example, Westra under with the Chamber, Riverside Farmers Market, Riverside Arts Weekend, and Friends of the Fourth. Does the board have any questions as it relates to this? Sorry.
Any questions for Manager Francis? I just have one under 5. I believe it's on page 146 or 164. It says prohibitions. Publications and postings that contain references to any political candidate, referenda, ballot questions, or political party. I only question whether we want to remove referenda, because if we're going to be putting out a referenda, we have the right as a village to educate our residents, but not advocate. And this takes away that. This takes away these various different communication tools away from that. Am I interpreting that correctly?
You are correct, and so you may want to delete that reference, because you do have the ability to do that, and may want to as a board.
That's my only thought. Is there any Question on whether that should be, stay in there or removed?
Should be removed from the prohibition.
Okay. Anybody else? Doug?
Great.
Agree.
So with that change, if I can have a motion and a second.
Motion made with that change.
Motion by trustee Gallego, second.
Second.
Second by trustee Marshaga. Manager Francis?
Trustee Evans? Trustee Gallegos?
Aye.
Trustee Clarity? Trustee Marshaga?
Aye.
Trustee Hannan? Trustee Pollock?
Aye.
Motion carries. If it's to everyone's agreement, I'd like to postpone E to an upcoming March agenda, because we're having some new information coming, which will help us make further discussions on this. So taking building department inspection overview and moving that into probably the March 1st discussion.
Second.
Second. And the first, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any issues with that?
None.
Okay. Okay. Discussion and update on lead service line replacement. Who wants to start? Okay.
All right, good evening, everyone. This is a continuation of our discussion from last meeting. I will pretty much go over the summary that I had of the last meeting, just to refresh everyone's memory, and then we'll go into the financial portion of it after that. So as we all remember, last February, we discussed the law that the state passed called the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act that went into effect January 1st of 2022, which enacted two components, which are the development of a comprehensive water service line inventory, which is currently underway, and that is due to the state April 15th, 2024, so a little over a year from now. The second portion is the lead service line replacement plan, which we already have completed, and that was submitted as part of our IEP application a year ago approximately, and we are still waiting on a response from them on that. At the conclusion of the board meeting a year ago, the consensus of the board at the time was to cover 100% of the cost to replace lead service lines in an emergency repair situation, of which we have done 4 of, 3 last year, 1 this year. The approximate cost of those are $10,000 a piece. And we have 2 more that are kind of in the pipeline. So as part of that, this is more of an aside to that statement, is when we do these replacements, we currently get 3 quotes, and then we take the lowest of 3 quotes. So each individual service, we go out to quote, we bring them back, and that's how we make our decision. We're currently in negotiations or discussions with surrounding communities to help streamline that process. We'll probably go into, we'll get requests for proposals for a larger scale project for these emergency one-off repairs. So we don't necessarily have to go out to bid every single time. It's going to help streamline the process on those. And then, of course, economy of scale, hopefully will bring the price down. So that's currently being discussed. Regarding the funding, of course, last year the village was optimistic that we would receive grant funding, which it's come to our attention that the application process is changing in 2024. Our engineering firm brought this to our attention a couple weeks ago, and a number of the criteria will, in essence, rule us out for grant eligibility. So knowing that, that's kind of where we are now with the discussion is, well, how are we going to fund this? Something to think about, the upcoming Shenstone project, which will be occurring later this summer, as part of the CIP when it was originally budgeted for, did not include the private portion of the lead service lines. So from, in essence, the main to the B box is already included in the price, but the private portion, if the village should take on that cost, is approximately $450,000 in addition to what has currently been budgeted in the CIP for that project, because we're replacing the water main, and the state law dictates you have to replace the service from the main to the meter anytime you do a water main project. So that's that. So at this time, if you would direct your attention to, I believe it's page 173 of the packet, which has a very nice flow chart. Breaking down some things we'd want to consider, being that we no longer have grants. So we'll walk through this step by step, and as opposed to me reading all of it at once, we'll do one portion at a time, and then as we decide how we want to move forward, we can kind of lay out the other portion of it. So basically, that considering we don't have grants, it leaves us with three options. The one is status quo, which, based on the board's decision a year ago, is the village covers the entire cost, which moving forward would be the entire line, whether it's emergency or not. The second option would be based on the ordinance, which is the village is responsible for the cost from the main to the roundway or the B box, which is in essence the shut off in your parkway, typically painted blue. And then the homeowner would share the cost, and they would be responsible for their portion, which is the B box to the meter. So it would be a shared cost. Then the third option, which is the homeowner would pay for all of it. That would require an ordinance change, noting the responsibility that the homeowner would be responsible from the main to the meter. This isn't unusual that some other communities actually have this already in place. So we should probably start with those three options. And then if we determine which one of those three is suitable, we'll kind of go through the balance.
So I just want everyone to understand, right now, and if I understand our conversation, as you've done other streets, you have replaced the main to the B box with 1-inch copper.
Correct. As part of every water main project going back 15 or 20 years, the village replaces their responsibility, which is from the main to the B box, with 1-inch copper. So we have a litany of streets out there that have received water mains in the last 15 or 20 years where they have 1-inch copper whips all ready to the B box, in essence stubbed out with copper.
Okay.
The remaining cost would be from the B box to the meter on those particular roads.
Okay, so let's start there. Does everyone feel that we should maintain what our ordinance already says, and that is we cover from the main to the B box, which we have been doing for the last 15 years, 20 years? Yes, sir.
If I can just sort of take us down a path. If we go with option 2 or option 3, village and homeowner share the cost, homeowner pays 100%. In this chart, there's contemplated a payment plan where the village would fund and the homeowner would pay us back. And I'm wildly uncomfortable with that concept of the village getting into, in effect, personal loans. It raises the whole aspect of what happens if payments aren't made. Do we have to put a lien on the property? Does that create a whole administrative burden that, is probably best suited by another funding route? So just want to raise that as a potential issue. And then the other sort of general issue I just want to get out there is, as I said at the end of last meeting, the replacement of lead water lines, I think is a community-wide issue, because if homeowners elect not to replace these lines, if they're given that option, the value of the housing stock will decrease because potential buyers would have to fund the cost of bringing their properties up to code. So that could create a sort of depression in value among Riverside properties. And I think that sort of puts us in the purview of the village board to do something, community-wide, option 1, pay for it, with a view of protecting, the value of our properties, or put another way, avoiding a situation where we're artificially depressing the value of properties in our village.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Pollack?
Well, to answer your question, I am in agreement that we should continue, at the very least, we should continue to pay 100% of the public side of the B box.
Okay.
And I think that's what you were asking.
That's what I was
right?
asking, yes, thank you.
Yeah. Now, I have other thoughts on the rest of it, but we'll get to that.
So the other part of this is, can you just, I was not familiar with exactly what what needed to be done in order to run a line into the house. Could you explain that to everyone so everyone knows
Sure.
what has to take place?
So the process of replacing a line would be typically boring it. So you can either bore the line or you can trench it. There's less restoration if you bore it. So
And
you're
that's the machine that we see
Yeah,
on
it
our
goes on an
parkway
angle,
that runs
brings
the
it
gas
up,
lines.
pulls copper back through, versus trenching where you're literally digging a trench and laying it in there. So the preferred method is to bore it, less restoration in
So
essence.
you're leaving the lead pipe in the ground?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So you have bore pits. One is typically above the main, where you're going to tap the main. One will be in the parkway where the bee box is to be located. And then the final bore would be up into the basement through a hole in the floor and or the wall, depending on how the basement's aligned, elevation and depth, all that type of stuff. With
So
that,
I just want everyone to understand. So that, what the village will be doing, or the contractor will be doing, is coming into our basement and cutting a 2-foot by 2-foot hole, approximately, and going down to receive this bore, either coming up from the ground or coming in through the foundation.
right.
And then
depending-
they'd finish off the,
Yeah, they get underneath the footing of the basement, so they come out at an angle, come up through the receiving pit, and then, of course, they'll concrete it back over, fill the stone, concrete it over, and then you have a copper service coming in your basement, then gets piped and tied back in your trunk line with the meter and all that stuff. So there's restoration involved, whether it's on the exterior of the house or the interior. If the village had received grant funding, or if we do in the future, we will be responsible for not only the cost of the service installation itself, but all of the restoration as well. So backfilling the holes, planting grass with seed or sod inside the home. It'll be the cost of the concrete. It'll be the cost of drywall, depending how people's basements are configured. That being said, though, because we currently do not have grant funding, it's up to the board's discretion as to what portion of that we're willing to pay for. We can pay for the cost of the service, which already is a win for the homeowner, and then not pay for the restoration.
okay, I just want to make sure everybody understands that there's a restoration aspect here. People that have finished basements may have tile in their basement.
The restoration costs are gonna range.
Yeah.
A couple $100 to a couple $1,000.
Right.
Okay, so we're talking about exact restoration. And the only reason that I ask is because if a person has a finished basement that is finished or doesn't have a basement, and it comes up into the interior of something else in some other format, will that be restored to?
That's the question.
Yes, that is my question.
If we had received grant funding, it would be an in-kind restoration. We'd restore it to as
And
was.
without the grant funding, will it be an in-kind restoration?
That is. up
That's our
to you
discussion.
guys.
That's our decision, whether we want to pay to have that restoration done.
Yes.
Okay.
You're in favor of it.
You're in favor of paying, that's great, okay. So continue.
So from what I'm hearing, we want to stay with status quo, or are we looking at the shared costs?
Yeah, how do people feel about at least paying to get the line into the home? Yes, Mr. Pollack?
Well, first, you asked about just the public side of the bee box. I think no one indicated whether they agreed with that, but I think everyone agrees with that. That part of the status quo we would continue to do.
Correct.
Okay. I have two thoughts about who pays for the private side. Initially, I thought, well, we should, make the homeowners pay because it's benefiting them. But I heard what Trustee Hannon said at the last meeting and again tonight, and he changed my mind on that because there is a public interest here. And our housing stock and our housing values is one of the most valuable things in the village. And we have we need to maintain that. So I've kind of gotten away from that. And the second thought I had, or gotten away from the idea that the homeowner pays for it all, because there is that public benefit. But then the other thought I had was that we have already paid 100% for a good number of service lines.
Six.
6.
Six, correct?
It will be in, by the end of the month, it'll
Yeah,
be
six.
6.
To me, we've kind of made that decision, that we're going to pay it 100%, because I don't see how we can go back on that now, in fairness. Now, I think the interior restoration is something that we could leave to the homeowner, and we could give them the option of, you know, if they want to do it themselves, they can, or at least even the exterior part. But yeah, doing the interior restoration could get tricky, and, I mean, we should do the minimum that we would
Yeah,
do for
cement the-
unfinished
yeah.
concrete basement, but nothing beyond that. That's kind of where I'm thinking now, but I'm very interested to hear what others say.
Yes.
It's important to note that the ones that we've done thus far haven't been precedent-setting related to the restoration because they have been in unfinished basements.
Yes.
Just to make sure I understand, if we decide that residents have to bear this cost and a resident can't or declines, what happens then? What is the process then?
If they decline us replacing their service, they sign in essence, notification that goes on file with the IDPH saying they refuse us into their home for the replacement of the service line.
I'm troubled by the potential inequities of that, because what we're talking about is a fair amount of cost, right, for a homeowner to bear for something that's deemed a safety issue but has been imposed on us. I would hate to find ourselves in a situation in which the people who have the money at the time to be able to facilitate that sort of thing are able to do it and everybody else declines. And then we have questions about our housing stock, we have questions about equity. And so while I'm also troubled by the cost of this on behalf of the village, I'm viewing it from an equity angle, that we stand the chance of being more fair, more supportive of our housing stock, and more supportive of our residents if we find a way to facilitate this.
That'll be Ms. John's job after we get done with this discussion.
Can only take you guys so far.
Yeah, Dan's only going to take us to this point. So do we have I think we have at least I'm seeing, Naz, that we have a consensus to replace the lines to the resident's home. Am I correct? Or am I see heads over there.
Yes?
Yes.
Are we talking about inside their homes?
It has to go inside the home, but we could talk about the restoration part, but the pipe has to go inside the home.
So when we do our part on public land, that includes the residents' property? So I thought so my understanding was that we definitely are going to do our part on the public land. And now today we're discussing extending it to do their part also.
Correct. Which we have been doing already.
Only because we expected or anticipated some grant funding.
Exactly.
It wasn't just, so I don't feel like it's precedent setting. Trustee Pollock, you mentioned that because we had already done these homes, that now we are kind of stuck doing the rest of the homes, when there was like a distinction. We thought we'd have money to do all the homes, and now we're not going to be able to do all the homes. So yes, it is going to be unfair for the rest of them, but I don't think that should be a reason or an argument for agreeing to pay for this for everybody. I'm also concerned about the funding, and I know, yes, Karen is very talented and is always able to figure out how to pay for things, but this is a very expensive project, $7 million project.
It'll be more than that by the time we're done.
3,000 homes at 10,000 apiece, so it's going to be expensive. But I still think we have a consensus that we will bring the pipe into the home. We have 3 on that side and 2 on this side. Yes, Mr. Pollock.
A couple things. One is, I understand what Trustee Evans is saying, that maybe some of us thought we go ahead and pay that because we're going to get grant money. I didn't think that way, because I know how grant funding is, and there's never a guarantee that we were going to get grant funding. But I understand that, I completely understand that argument, and it's a, you know, it's a reasonable position to take. But the other thing I was going to mention too is that when we say the village is going to pay 100%, we're not really saying the village is going to pay 100%. What we're saying is that all of the residents are going to pay for it instead of just the residents that are having their service lines replaced. So if by paying 100%, what we're saying is that those handful, I don't know, I have no idea how many people don't have lead service lines. I'm guessing it's a minority.
It is.
So what we're really saying there is that those people who don't have lead service lines are going to contribute to it the same way that those with lead service lines are. And that is because there's a public benefit. The individual property owner benefits the most from the replacement, but everyone benefits to a degree. So we're spreading that cost amongst everybody instead of just those who are getting their line replaced.
I think now's a good time for Karen to give us an idea what this will cost us and how we will do this.
So the easiest way to describe this is through a rate increase. So I did put some tables in front of you tonight, assuming that as part of the water sewer fund, this is an enterprise fund, so those user fees do pay for 100% of the expenses within the fund. So before you tonight, there's a table of lead service line adjustment based on debt service. Outlined in yellow on this is your current water and sewer capital improvement schedule, but I added the additional revenues and expenses for these lead service replacement projects. So you'll see on the top in the revenue sections, in 2025 and 2030, we've increased the planned debt issuances by $4 million apiece. Also, there is a line for lead service line rate adjustment to fund that debt service. Near the bottom of the schedule, you'll see also highlighted in yellow, lead service line replacements for the scheduled projects. As Director Tabb stated earlier, the projects already include from the main to the B box. This is the estimated cost to bring that B box to the house. I don't believe those costs include full restoration. Lead service line replacement for annual replacements, we estimated 12-point repairs a year, so that's what that line is. That because any break or repair to the lead service line requires replacing it all the way from the main to the home. Then you'll see the differential in debt service payments. So I've prepared two different options. The first option, based on debt service, would be adjusting the water rate when the debt service payments start. So it would increase in 2026 by $2.20 per unit. And again, in 2031, that would increase to $4.45 a unit. This unit is 1,000 gallons, which is what we're transitioning all of our water meters to as the meter replacement program. 1,000 gallons is 748 cubic feet. So you'll see below in blue and green, this is the estimate of what the minimum bill would be, as well as the average bill. You'll see some other rate increases throughout. We estimate in our financial forecast a 3.5% increase in water and sewer fees based on the estimated increases from McCook and labor contracts. So the other option I put together for you tonight is a little bit more of a smoothed approach. So this would increase the water rate by $1.62 In 2024, that's the line on the bottom for lead service line rate, and it would increase slower throughout the cost of the plant.
Why, and why can't we make this even? Like, add all these up together, divide it by whatever, and say, we're going to add $2.30 every year so we don't get the big jump in 2032.
That's what the second page does. That's the one based on smoothing. So it starts with 162 for your lead service line.
Right.
And then it just incrementally increases 20 cents the following year. It increases much more smoothly.
Why can't it be evenly, is what I'm asking. You know what I'm saying?
It could be, it would just be a little bit more of a shock to the system then.
Her calculations were based on the financial forecast, and then in addition to that, what was needed to repay the debt service.
Okay.
So that's why it's very precise to the penny.
So there's two
Yes, I'm sorry.
variables then. There's the costs we're talking about, and then you've also added in McCook's fees, other additional external fees beyond our control. Is that
Correct.
correct? Okay.
So the first line, that lead service line rate,
Okay.
that's just the funding that debt service payment for, and then the change in the water and the sewer rate, that's increased by 3.5% a year, which is what we use in our financial forecast to cover McCook and staff.
I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The other thing I wanted to point out is if it's included, if the funding of this is included within the rate versus a separate charge or payment plan, it is more likely to be able to be eligible for financial assistance, either through the Riverside Township or the CETA has programs for low-income water assistance program, or LIWAP. They will pay for user fees, but they will not pay for added charges such as the payment plan on a meter replacement. So if people are having trouble with these higher water bills, there are different, including it in the rate, increases their chance of getting economic assistance.
Any questions for Ms. Johns? Yes.
I'll be honest, I didn't get a chance to see this before the board meeting, so I really haven't digested it. I guess I'm interested in knowing, how are we going to go about, maybe you said this, maybe I just missed it, most likely. How are we going to go about doing these replacements? Are we going to do it when we do a road project and expect that just doing it that way will get us to the end goal?
Glad you asked that question. Because there is an X factor to this.
Okay.
The costs associated that are laid out here are relative to our 10-year CIP. Okay, and then we also have the 12 per year that are just the one-offs. As part of the law that the state passed, starting 27, once you have a lead service line replacement plan that's been approved based on the number of services you have in town, you have to replace it at a certain percentage per year, and you have a certain number of years to complete that. So for Riverside, we have a 17-year replacement window at no less than 6% per year, starting in 27. It's unknown whether we can front load that or not. We're still looking into that. But assuming we can't, the lead service line inventory is going to come into play once it's finished at how many we have to do per year at no less than 6%, whatever that number might be. That's not figured into here, because this is based on what we know and what we have planned. The unknown, though, is exactly how many we have in the ground. So just thought I'd throw that out there, because that is important.
Okay, so after we get done doing the streets and is the plan then to, how many main to B boxes do we have to, I mean, do you start going and getting the main to B box section? Or going to the houses that have the main to B box already in copper and they're just doing the final section?
We have, for instance, if you look at this thing in, theoretically, 26, 27, we don't have water main projects, so we're not going to be doing a main to the house on any old service or any old water mains we have. So theoretically, if we had the money, we could go to all of the blocks that have a updated water main where the 1-inch copper has been installed on previous water main replacement projects, and we could hit the B-box to home portions. So that's how I would suggest we do it. If the money is available on years that we're not doing water mains, we do the B-box to home portions on the sections of town that already have the,
1-inch copper.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I think we got these numbers, a lot to look at. I mean, I think some of the questions we have to digest is whether, how are we going to, how are we going to sell these numbers? And the second thing is the unknown question about what do we do inside the house? Whether, I think that's going to be another big question, because obviously some people have better, nicer basements or whatever. I don't think we have too many houses on slabs, but most houses have basements. And, what happens if the tile's not available? What happens if, things you have to replace the tile in the whole basement?
Wide range of expenses.
Wide range of expenses.
Right.
So,
And kind of what you're looking at right now is what we would consider a snapshot in time. Every year we reassess the CIP based on a number of things, but these numbers will most likely change as the years progress, especially once we get more information on how much we actually have. We can input those numbers, especially for the years we don't have water main projects. So in 27, we have to start doing some X number of services per year to meet that deadline. It's just we don't know what that is exactly.
when do you need a firm commitment from the board and moving forward? South Coat's going to be mid to late summer?
Shenstone will be
Shenstone?
in summer to early fall. The engineering is done. So they're going to get replaced anyways,
Right.
all the way to the home, because we have to do that as part of the project. The funding of it, though, there's time.
Okay.
The design portion of the project is still going to,
Still going to move forward.
still going to be the full replacement, yeah.
So we need to make a decision probably within the next 2 months, give or take. 3 months.
When the bills start rolling in, we're going to want to know
How we're going to pay it.
how it's being paid for, yeah.
Okay. So give me 2 months? I mean, okay.
Unless somebody else sees an issue with that.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Francis. No, Mr. Hannon?
Yeah, and I'd love to get input on this, not necessarily tonight, but at a future meeting on the, raw finish versus completely finish. And what I'm struggling with is replacing the water line is now mandated by Illinois law. So it's not a question of, I don't want to do this. You eventually have to do this, and as I've said before, if the current homeowner elects not to do it, they're just passing on a cost to the, and I'm talking in the context of a finished basement. Like, I don't want a hole in my ground, I don't want to redo my basement. Somebody's going to come in and say, okay, I'll buy your house, but we need the adjustment because I have to have all these costs to redo the basement. So it's just a matter of, it has to be done at some point. And that's, I can understand the discussion, this is completely voluntary. I don't want to tear up my basement. If someone's going to tear up my basement, I want to complete it as is. I just keep trending towards, we should go towards the rough finish because, the village is already taking on protecting the public policy issue, which is replacing lead lines and keeping the property values from being depressed by not having the completed lead line removal. And I'm struggling with how do we get to customizing finishes inside. Again, we have a great board. We have people with a lot of different views. I'd love to hear sort of perspective on that one because I'm struggling.
Question. Any
I mean, just from my own experience, having sewer work done over the summer so that we could put in a patio, it required us tearing a lot, like a wide path through our basement and ripping up the landscaping in the front of our home. Like, sometimes it's not just gonna be a little 2x2 square of space that needs to be fixed, because all of our homes are different.
Right, all of our basements are different.
I have a lot of questions how restoration would work, right? Take cost aside, that's a significant aside, but cost aside, as you said, Trustee Evans, all of our homes are different. Are we hiring landscapers and drywallers and
Yeah.
tile people to do all of this? I mean, I know that is very exciting to you, Director Tab, but that sounds terrible to me.
Of course.
I don't want to stick a homeowner with I don't know what it looks like, a hole in their wall or something like that, but I guess I would just need to learn a lot more and understand a lot more before I could get behind restoring it to the condition in which it was found. I don't want to leave homeowners in the lurch here, but I do think what we're contemplating is a solution in which they get the line replaced, something that we're not already obligated to do. But if you have a very nice basement, some concessions might need to be made.
The way it would most likely roll out is, as part of the project, there would be a separate contractor that would be bidding for the private side service, because a lot of the underground guys won't necessarily do that portion. So whatever plumbing firm is selected to do that, they would be responsible for the restoration. So they would most likely have to hire out subs to handle the landscaping, the interior restoration. It would be under the plumber's guidance as to how that's going to occur. Of course, the village would, we'd see it along, but they would be the ones ultimately responsible for it as part of their
Right.
price that they'd be quoting.
But we'd be paying, in this construct, we'd be paying for, ultimately that cost gets passed on. We'd be paying for the sub that
Sure.
fixes the tile, paying for the sub that fixes the trim work,
Right.
paying for someone to paint it presumably.
Yes.
I only see that being a skyrocketing cost.
Yeah.
To me, I'm less troubled by a resident that looks at this and says, you're only going to raw finish it, or whatever term you said, and say, I don't want that, my basement's too nice, I don't want to deal with the hassle. That seems like a different choice than, I can't afford right now to carry the line into my home. And so I guess I just would, like Trustee Hannan, would have to understand a lot more before, cost-wise, before I can get behind that.
I don't know.
Every home's gonna be different.
Yeah, I don't know how we can get that
I can't even
cost.
give you
Yeah.
a rough estimate. If it's unfinished basement, it's gonna be marginal. If it's a finished basement and we have no other option to go through the front of the house, that's completely finished, we're gonna have to open a wall and potentially create a bump out because you're gonna have a meter sitting there. Unless you can pull into it or tie into the trunk line in the closet or wherever it might be. You have to come in the side of the house. You might be able to poke into a utility room where your water heater is and you hit that trunk line, but there's so many variables as far as restoration. It really should be a go, no-go on the restoration. To get into the weeds as to what we're gonna cover, it's gonna be
I'm
difficult.
just hearing that the cost is unquantifiable.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Karen,
Sure.
can you find us unquantifiable money?
I'm scared of the suggestion of unquantifiable rate increases.
Well, plus the fact that, when you go into a basement, if somebody has, redid their basement 10 years ago, you're not gonna find that tile again.
Yeah.
You're not gonna find that paint color
Right.
again, or the paint's gonna change, or whatever. So you're gonna end up having to fix the whole basement, or paint the whole basement, or, whatever. I think what we're doing is above and beyond, and I think if we get them back to a safe basement where we fill in the hole and cement, where that kind of stuff, I think the homeowner is ahead of the game by quite a bit. But that's my thoughts. But yes, Mr. Pollack.
I agree with that, and in fact, I would extend that to the exterior as well, that if a bush is damaged, or has to be removed, that we're not going to replace a bush. Hopefully with trees, we can auger under them and not have to.
Even the landscaping around the front of the house, unless there is front porch that you might have to access. But typically, the landscaping around the front of the house isn't even gonna have to be.
Okay, well then, yeah.
If you're, you know, if you go through the boring process.
Right.
And where a meter is now is not necessarily where a meter is going to be.
Where it is now does not necessarily dictate where it has to be when the service is installed. We've actually relocated some on some of the ones we've already done because of the layout of the basement.
So you go to an unfinished part of the, you try to do it as,
You gotta be next to a cold water line, a cold water trunk line, so you can tie into it with your service, but
okay,
the configuration of every basement is gonna be different.
okay. Yes.
But the more I think, real quick, the more I think of it as I stand up here, from a quoting purpose, after the design is complete, we will need to know if we're gonna cover or restore versus not restore. Because the plumbers that we're gonna receive quotes from, they're gonna have to know that as well. So if we wanna postpone that decision, I would say within the next month, we're gonna need to know that.
Is anybody willing to go out on the limb and say we're going to restore or not restore? And build consensus around that? Mr. Pollack, I would assume you're not restore inside and out.
I say we just restore interior to the minimum for safety.
Okay. Mr. Hannon?
I'll agree with Doug.
Ms. Marshaska?
I'm struggling with this one. I see both sides. I see a lot of homeowners being very upset about their finished things that they've invested in being left with a concrete cap in the middle of what they've done already. So I'm struggling.
Okay, go ahead.
Could maybe, to make it a little bit more palatable, you know, when we're going in and saying the village is gonna replace your lead service line at approximate cost, we can create a form and say it will approximately cost the village X amount of dollars so that they're aware of that. So they're not necessarily having to pay that bill, but then also signing off that they will be responsible for restoration and that. So that then they're kind of being put on notice, we're doing this, but you're responsible for this piece. And if they elect not to sign off on it, then maybe it goes back to what Trustee Clarity said, and they sign off on the IDPH, and then it becomes their responsibility. That's worst case scenario.
They always have an option.
But at least then it puts them fully on notice. It gives them the facts of the village is doing this at a cost of this. Here's what we're responsible for, and here's ultimately what you're responsible for.
Would the homeowners have an opportunity to have a consult with the proposal so that they're actually informed of like what the proposal is and what it would look like inside their home? Like where it would come in and how it would be done and how it would be situated? And then the opportunity to decline or accept?
Dan, did you hear that? Aberdeen, if you can.
Sure. I just wondered if, at the outset, if they were notified that their project was, you know, coming down their street and that their property would be eligible for, not eligible, but they either have to accept it or they have to decline it. Would there be an opportunity for a consult where the contractor would come in and look at their interior and, you know, let them know what their proposed work plan would be there so they could decide whether or not to accept or decline with a more informed, rather than just saying, oh, okay, and letting them in and then coming home to something that they didn't expect.
So the intent already is so we get the best price from the plumber as far as the installation, is we're going to, in conjunction with our engineering firm, one of the engineers, the field engineer, and then somebody from Public Works is actually going to contact every homeowner on this gemstone project. And we're going to get into the basements because we want to see the layouts of all those basements. And as we get in there, we'll have a good idea of where this is coming up. You know, whether it's going to come the side, the front, what side of it, of the front of the house. So the property owner obviously will be there because they have to let us in, and at that point we'll have a discussion to what extent is, we're going to have to either open something up, or if it's unfinished basement, very limited.
So there will be
There'll be discussion.
There will be a discussion, and it will be an informed decision.
Yes, because we want to know or have as much information so we can give it to the prospective bidders for this project to help rein in those costs. We don't want them to just necessarily give us a flat fee for unknowns.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
it does.
Okay. This side? How are we on restoration?
Just anybody who has had a room in their house, maybe like remodeled, like a remodeled kitchen, you know how much work you have to do as a homeowner, even if you have a project manager. You see that they did something wrong, and so you have to tell the project manager, and would the project manager be the village? And so I just see a lot of, it's not just gonna be as easy as we have the engineer figured out and then it's implemented. There's gonna be bumps and bruises along the way.
Yeah, the engineer would not tell them how much it's gonna cost and what would have to be removed. It's gonna be, we're most likely gonna need to place the service here. And then we're gonna note unfinished, finished basement, and then move on. We're not gonna go into consultation on how we're gonna potentially restore the basement. That's the engineer nor the staff member would have that knowledge. when they're
Yeah,
looking at
all the
basement.
headaches that come with remodeling
Right.
are gonna be there in every house.
But they
And
will get a
who's gonna
service.
manage those,
Right,
Well,
service.
that's the point. I don't think we want to manage that.
right?
Okay, and that,
Yeah.
I think I've spoken to this. I still don't see, I'm sympathetic to the problem that will be caused here. This seems like a very difficult project, but as I understand it, we don't really have a choice.
okay, see,
Right.
yes, I think you have your restoration answer.
But I also think we need to build in a fund in the event that there are, damages outside the scope of described work that occur. Like, because if you're talking about a finished space and the representation is that, it's only going to be this 2 square foot area here, and it's outlined where it is, and then the homeowner consents to that, but then the guys and the plumbers drop tools and scrape things across things that are already finished, and they cause incidental damages to the finished space. I think we need to be.
That needs to be taken care of between the contractor and the homeowner then. I mean,
Well,
how do we,
then
how
we
do
gotta
our
think
contract-
about how that's
Huh?
gonna
Our
work.
contract, Right, I don't know how we, how does it?
Yeah, we'll
Yeah, if there's,
insurance
there's
and all
a
of that.
disregard
Yeah.
damages clause, it
Yeah.
would be between the homeowner and the contractor's insurance.
Right, that's,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
they'll all be permitted and bonded and all of that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, I think we got that part. We'll digest the numbers.
Okay, so we're gonna cover the exterior restoration.
No, we're not gonna cover any restoration.
restoration.
No restoration. Just as I understand it, if there's a bush that needs to be replaced or whatever, the exterior, well, you're gonna fill the hole in the.
You're gonna make it safe.
You're gonna make
Close
it
up.
safe.
So yes, while we are making it safe, there is a minimal expense to throw some grass seed on the dirt.
Correct.
I would say we do that.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's
So
what
that's when I say exterior restoration. We're gonna fill the holes, we're gonna make sure grass grows again.
Correct,
We're not gonna replace landscaping.
correct, correct.
Basic stuff.
And then you're gonna fill the concrete hole.
If we have to expose a hole in the road for whatever reason, we're gonna
Fill it.
backfill the road.
Is that good? Okay, now we'll digest the
Monitor
numbers.
the expenses.
Yeah. All right, well, at least we know these numbers cover that.
Upcoming projects.
That scope of work. Is there anything else you'd like to throw at us before you?
One thing for future planning, typically we do a rate adjustment around July when we receive the rate increase from McCook. This kind of contemplates an increase in January and an increase in July. Would the board like us to streamline that to one rate increase a year? I don't need an answer on that today, but it's food for thought.
What's the advantage to that?
It can be slightly more palatable to the resident, and it's a lot of communication and a lot of decisions by the board multiple times a year.
So each time we do a rate adjustment, there's an ordinance update, and also just the volume of calls come in based on every time we do a rate adjustment. So if we can streamline that in any way that makes it easier for that communication piece.
I would think we we want to keep these rate adjustments to the minimum.
Yeah,
The minimum of it as in quantity during a specific year.
well, yeah, once a year would be great.
Yeah. I think people need to understand, they're all sitting with a 100-year-old, $10,000 pipe in their front lawn. And this thing can go out today, tomorrow, or in 20 years from now. So it's going to have to be done eventually. So you either pay for it this way, or you write a check for $10,000. So I think this is actually more palatable. But we'll continue to think. We'll continue to, if anyone has any questions, I would, ask you to please forward them to Manager Francis, and then she can get them over to Director Johns, and then we can have a further discussion. April, you want to put this, because we have the Army Corps coming the second weekend in March? Or second meeting in March?
That may be moved to the first week of March.
Okay, so why don't we just go for the first week in April for now?
Okay.
Is that good? Everybody, think a month can? Okay. Give us a chance to obviously hear feedback. Okay. Thank you. We move on to letter G, further consideration of site plan review process in the Village of Riverside. Leonard Siren.
Thank you. This is a continuation of the board's discussion regarding the site plan review process. And we have a couple points of consideration for the village board tonight. So outside of variations, special uses, and planned unit developments, we have site plan reviews for new site plans, major change amendments, and minor change amendments. And if you look at page 186 in your packet, you'll see two tables. One is the current site plan review process, and one is a potential site plan review process. So if you take a look at the current site plan review process, again, you have new site plan review of major change amendments that are reviewed by staff and decided by the Planning and Zoning Commission. If you look at the potential site plan review process, what we could do is to give the village board more say in the site plan review process is shift that decision from the Planning and Zoning Commission to the village board. Now, in the potential table, it continues the review under PZC. So a new site plan coming forward for review would first be reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission, which would make a recommendation to the village board, which would make the final decision. So the question is, assuming that the village board would like to have the final decision when it comes to new or major change amendments to site plan reviews, would you also still want to have the Planning and Zoning Commission review site plans as part of that process?
Can you give me a definition of what's considered minor or major? I know you gave us
Sure.
some things, but I'm trying to figure out why is there a distinguishing there, and why that can't all be done by staff.
Sure. So if you look at the following page 187 in your packet, there's a title Site Plan Major Change Amendment. So, and then there's letters A through H. All of those changes to a site plan would be considered a major change. Now, again, this is not considering a variation or a special use or plan unit development. This is just, you have an existing site plan and you want to make a change. For example, if you want to increase the gross floor area and the zoning code allows you to have that increased gross floor area, or you want to change the building height and that's within the, that's allowed under the zoning code, that would require a major change amendment for the site plan.
So all the A through H are changes that are already covered by our zoning code, but would not deem a variation.
In this example, yes.
Correct. Okay. Okay.
So if you look right under there, there's a minor change amendment. So there's a couple of things that can be approved by staff without going through that process. So a change to a landscape plan that doesn't result in the reduction of the net amount of plant material or a change of the use of species not on the recommended plant list. So it's very minor changes that can be just approved by staff without going through that process. And that leads to the second question is, are there some site plan reviews that you would want to delegate to staff for review? And what would that process look like? And I think Lance had some comments on that potential process.
Yeah, so if you wanted, you could have staff make decisions on as many things as you felt comfortable with. You could have, for new site plans, you could have staff do an internal analysis on whether they consider it significant or insignificant, not necessarily insignificant, but sort of a more routine site plan or a more significant project. It could be based on square footage, you know, the size of the site, and then delegate to staff to approve certain site plans that were more routine. And then regarding those ones that weren't more routine, they could come right to the village board if they didn't need a public hearing, or as was proposed here, those would go to P&Z for recommendation of the site plan to the village board.
Okay. Does everybody grasp what Lance just said? Is there any questions or thoughts? And how would you like to proceed? Mr. Hannon?
I'm trying to digest, and I guess what is being proposed, is that what in our notes reflected as Berwyn, Brookfield, Clarendon Hills, Elmhurst, LaGrange, and Western Springs do?
Under the, yes, that's well, in those instances, they delegate review to staff. Let's see.
Well, it says Planning and Zoning Commission review and make recommendations to the village board.
Sure.
So
And
I
the
just
village
want-
board makes the final decisions on variation, special use, site plan review, yep.
So that sounds like what you set forth in the proposed, unless I'm missing something. In the chart on, where are we at?
168, 186?
186. I'm just trying to understand how, what those other towns do versus what you're proposing. It looks the same to me. I'm just confirming if I'm missing something.
No, I don't think you're missing anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
But do we know what the other towns do with minor or major? Do they have, that's kind of an integral thing.
I'd have
That's
to
all
do-
individual.
Yeah, I'd have to take a look at each one and go back. Yeah.
I think what we do know is that anything that requires a public hearing will go in front of P&Z,
Right, along with the site plan review.
along with the site plan review.
And under this proposal, then only as a recommendation to the village board, as with the variation or the special use or whatever it may be. It would come as a recommending package.
Okay, so that's one portion. And the other portion is whether conceptual plan review meetings, site plan minor or major or new needs to go in front of P&Z, or whether that should be done staff, because those are all following our zoning codes that are already codified.
Correct, or just not to use P&Z, but to use staff unless it's perhaps new or it's a major, and then it would come to village board with a staff recommendation. So you don't make the person go through two levels for just a site plan, where what they're proposing, by definition, is already within the four corners of the zoning code.
Correct. Does everybody understand what he's saying? Mr. Pollack?
I believe this potential site plan review table, that's basically what planning and zoning is recommending, with the exception that they initially said a subcommittee of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I think at least a couple of us, if not more, the last time we talked about this is said we're not comfortable with this subcommittee concept. And I still feel strongly that way.
There are some legal concerns as well.
I
with
would
that,
imagine. And so I am in agreement with the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation, except that I think their site plan reviews should always be at a regular public meeting or a special public meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they should make a recommendation, and then it goes to the board. I want to, keep in mind, keep this in perspective. We've had, 4 of these last 4 years?
Not very many.
And so it doesn't come up very often. And what we gain by this is transparency. We gain, we rarely get a commercial development because we have no land for commercial development. And when we do, there's an opportunity for some sunshine on it before it gets built. Now, Granted, there's no public notices, you don't go through all that, but nonetheless, it's at a public meeting, there's a chance for people to see it. And I guess maybe more importantly, from what I see in these past cases, the Planning and Zoning Commission has added value to the final product. They've made suggestions, and they've worked with developers very effectively, and developers appear to have been open to their suggestions and have implemented and accepted their suggestions. So, so I see value in it, and I'd like to suggest that we accept the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation, except no subcommittee. And as far as minor versus major changes, I would leave it as it is, primarily based on the fact that we've had so few. It's not like we're putting this onerous burden on development in the village by making them go through this process. There's no legal notices or anything. It doesn't come up very often. And I'd rather err on the side of transparency and having things done at public meetings.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
So I'm a little bit confused by what you just said, Doug, and maybe you could clarify. So in the potential site plan review process portion of the chart where it says review at the Planning and Zoning Committee level, would you say that that should instead be public hearing and recommendation?
No.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Just
I'm-
recommendation.
Yeah,
Just
I'm
wanted to
saying,
clarify.
yeah, just review, same as it is now.
Oh.
Well, right now, it's decision. But that decision becomes review and recommendation, but it's still no public hearing.
The only time
No
public
public
hearing is needed is for
It's for the
variation,
variations in the
review, or
plan.
special
Okay.
use.
All right.
Other than that, it's just a recommendation.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hannan? You good?
I'm going to agree with Doug.
Okay. This side?
Roll.
In agreement, yeah.
Okay,
No subcommittee.
okay. I think we're
do it.
there.
Okay,
It's clear and easy. Very good.
Okay,
great.
thank you.
Bring that back.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, we move on to new business, an ordinance amending Title IV, Chapter 3 of the Riverside Village Code relative to signs. Planner Siren.
Thank you
This is your
very
night.
So this is the final button on the TOD ordinances, and I just wanted to take a second to recognize Chairperson Mateo, who did recognize the work that others done, but who herself did a tremendous amount of work to push these ordinances forward, and I appreciate all of her hard work for the village. So the revisions, as I mentioned, were drafted during the consideration of the TOD amendments. There are a couple of notable changes. Cabinet or box signs and pole signs are prohibited. However, and I want to note something, in the ordinance, you may want to recommend a change. In the ordinance, there is a list of prohibited signs. Box and cabinet signs has been added to the list of prohibited signs. Pole signs has not been added to that list. However, it has been struck through from the B1 tables, which effectively does prohibit it from those districts. If you want more clarity, I spoke with Lance, if you want to make a motion to add to add pole signs to the list of prohibited signs, that would make that even clearer. I believe the reason that it wasn't added to the list of prohibited signs during the discussion was to leave the door open for the Board of Trustees to approve a pole sign by variation. But you can still
Which you
approve
still can do
a
that,
pole
right.
sign by variation, even if it's on the list of prohibited signs.
So we've already, there are no pole signs in the CBD. That's written out.
According to the
No.
ordinance,
Yeah, and two of them.
They're
two
not
out of-
allowed
Two
in-
out of, I think, three out of four are gone.
yeah. According to the table, you can have a new one, yeah.
Okay, so on Harlem, there are, I think, three or four?
I'm sure you have a better understanding than I do.
We have one at Dr. Normati's has a pole sign, I think it's still there. Faro,
Faro.
and
Gas
then,
station, 2 gas stations, or 1 gas station.
yeah, okay, and then, is there two in, is there one for the restaurant and one for the new tax place? I think there's two in that spot.
Okay.
So we would know, so pole signs would be out in the TOD along Harlem. So that's the question. do our pole signs something that we want to allow on Harlem Avenue? I guess we can still allow them by variation,
Yes,
If
but
you-
not
there
by
would be.
right.
on a
Exactly.
case by case, right?
Right.
Okay? Everybody feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay?
Okay.
And other than that, the sign variation is very similar to what we have downtown.
Yeah. So then the motion simply, you don't need to do a separate motion, but the motion would be to approve what's in your packet, but adding pole sign to the list of prohibited signs, and we would finalize it.
Okay?
So
I have-
moved.
Can I have a motion to that effect? Yes. Ms.
I have a question relating to a different part of this.
Okay, shoot.
Okay, and maybe you can address it. So it looks like, from what I'm reading, in the Central Business District in the B2, we allow neon, and don't allow it in the TOD and B1. Can you explain the rationale for that?
Okay, let me.
So after we were talking outside, I
Yeah.
was looking through code, and it looks like it's only prohibited in the T1C, the transition district.
Okay.
I believe, and Planner Siren can double check that, but I think it's just that constraint.
But it's allowed in the Central Business District in the B2.
In B1 on Harlem
Mhm.
and in the CBD in B2.
Right,
Yep, with constraints.
okay. And why are we doing that?
I don't know that I have, off the top, an understanding of why that change was made, and I apologize that I don't have a note on that. I don't know if, Ashley was slightly involved in the sign discussion. If she recalls the reason behind that.
I also am not quite sure why we would allow it in one area and not the other. It makes perfect sense to not allow, a brighter light consistency in the transitional corridor for commercial. You have a central business district that would commonly be, again, another kind of focal point of activity, and potentially the consensus was to continue to allow that to exist in the central business district, but, yeah.
Well, I have a question as to whether there's an opportunity to do something with this and then the definition of it, because there is a difference between regular neon signs and LED neon. And, there are like environmental disposal issues and inefficiency issues related with actual neon. And LED neon is something that maybe if we have an opportunity, if we say, oh, this is allowable in these areas, maybe we want to, just curtail it and say, we choose, if people like neon or the appearance of neon in storefronts,
Right.
to basically choose the more environmentally sensitive and energy efficient product.
Okay.
I think what we're talking about today is just the TOD and the B1. So if we can bring up neon in the CBD and see how we want to address that, but that's not on the table for tonight.
Okay.
And it also might be worth looking into and maybe save it if real neon even exists anymore as a
It
as a
does.
product.
Yeah,
I don't,
but it does, and we haven't really.
Okay, 'cause that-
The
yeah.
way we've defined neon here
is
is
the
just
traditional
neon.
way. Yeah, it says neon too, right?
Right, it doesn't
Yeah,
say
'cause I mean,
LED neon.
I didn't know whether, I thought to myself, I'm not quite sure. Some products we call one thing are no longer made the way they traditionally were when it comes to lighting at all.
Right.
And I didn't know if neon, I don't know that traditional neon is currently manufactured, but it is, you're aware, okay.
I have to say, I thought neon was not allowed in the CBD. I thought we eliminated that in box signs. I mean, I think we had a carve out for maybe open signs, but I thought we didn't allow neons in any of our businesses downtown.
Well, maybe I was reading this incorrectly.
I could be wrong, but you can look at that and
Yeah.
we can come back to the CBD. But this, based on the TOD, Doug, Lance, could you reiterate Doug's motion?
Yes, it was to adopt the ordinance as presented, but adding pole signs to the list in the ordinance of prohibited signs.
Is that good, Doug?
Yes.
Okay, do I have a second? Do I?
I'll second.
Second by trustee Gallagher. Any further questions?
Yeah, I do. So I know we're only talking about the TOD rules, but I did read the whole ordinance, and so I had some questions about the prohibited signs. Is that something we're going to talk about later? Okay. The prohibited signs, if you want to go to 205, number 12, motor vehicles whose sole apparent purpose is to advertise a business. I thought it was an odd one because I wasn't sure how we would even regulate that or monitor it or address it. I don't see too many of them either. I mean,
Yes.
just wondering what the rationale was for that.
Well, it's some businesses will do that. It's a way of getting a cheap and dirty off-premises sign is what it is. It's easier, you have to invest in a billboard, but if you have a storefront and you have a sale, you want to take a sign for your sale and park a vehicle out on the street that has the
One of
sign
those.
about the sale, that's what
I
this
understand.
prohibits.
Yeah, wasn't picturing that.
It's like a cheap and dirty billboard
Yeah.
prohibition.
Does that impact the Gears to You truck? I mean, the Gears to You truck is in front of their space.
No, that's not the kind they're talking about.
Typically, when it comes to enforcement of this, if you have a wrapped vehicle that just advertises their business and that's part of their fleet, that's not what we're considering. That you park in your parking lot. This is in the exceptional case if someone built some sort of like a huge arrow on their roof and pointed it towards their business and then parked it in a street parking or their parking lot to draw the eye to the business. It's for the exceptional case where someone's trying to get around a rule.
In neon.
Correct, it wouldn't prohibit, an actual fleet vehicle that had an advertisement on it.
There are also vehicles that are created or with trailers that are specifically, like sometimes they can even get as fancy as having a digital projection screen and they'll park that or drive it through somewhere advertising an off-premises business. So it's to eliminate those kinds of signs.
All right. Also, number 14, it's about banners. So no person shall erect bunting banners or streamers attached to wires or to supporting devices. So in the central business district, we do have businesses that put up banners on their fencing. So is that what this is related to?
It is, but it does have an exception for things that are as temporary signage. And I don't know
I
exactly
saw
what
that.
would be allowed, but you can't have it as a permanent part of your signage.
Okay. And then on page 214, it was about provisions for certain signs. Try to find it. What are the provisions for, on number 4 on page 215, holiday decorations? Holiday decoration displayed in connection with civic, patriotic, or religious holidays is all it says. It doesn't say what the provisions are.
I'm looking at it. I'm
Oh,
not
that's
sure
the
what
next-
it's.
okay.
That's what it is. There are a list of things that are temporary signs. So temporary signs shall be permitted in the B2 Central Business District without a sign permit, subject to the provisions of this section. So some may have some limitations. This one simply says that these are allowed within the definition of a temporary sign. Holiday decorations are allowed as a temporary sign that doesn't require a separate permit.
Outside of business? Where is it allowed?
Wherever signage would be allowed, it just doesn't need a permit. These are exceptions for sign permitting requirements. So whatever limitations there are on signage more generally, like size of signs and things like that,
Okay.
would still be there. This simply eliminates the permit requirement for this category of signs.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Trustee Evans says they answered all your questions?
Yes.
Perfect. We have a motion and a second. Manager Francis, if you'd please call the roll.
Certainly. Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Clarity.
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Motion carries. New business number B, a resolution amending the Village of Riverside Employee Manual, Section 1.03, and on and on. Director Jens.
Good evening. Earlier this year, the fire department transitioned from a paid-on-call staffing model to a paid-on-premise staffing model. This change required staff to review some of the personnel policy requirements regarding definitions of part-time staff and benefits. So we've updated those categories to clarify several definitions and specifically outlining which fire department staff are eligible for sick vacation and holiday time off. Staff is in the process of doing a comprehensive employee manual overhaul, which will most likely be out sometime next year for approval, but we felt this was a prudent change to make at this time.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, if I can have a motion and a second.
Motion made.
Motion by Trustee Gallegos, second.
Second.
Second by Trustee Marshazga. Any further questions? Hearing none, Manager Francis.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Clarity.
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Motion carries. We move on to trustee reports and cross-community climate collaboration. Are there any trustee reports this evening?
I have one.
Please.
I just wanted to tell everyone to save the date for the Riverside Junior Women's Charity 2023 Brew Fest on April 22nd. It will take place at Riverside Swim Club, and there will be beer, barbecue, and live music. It's the juniors' largest and most fun annual fundraiser. So mark your calendars now because the event will definitely sell out, and the tickets go on sale March 17th.
Thank you. When is the wine and, is there still tickets to read between the vines?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
It's a library.
okay.
Yeah,
Bring
I
my
think
friends.
that I have tickets for it, and it is, let's see, it is Saturday, the 25th.
25th, so it's coming up.
So
And
it's
I
coming up, and I think the port special flights are all.
Sold out?
Those were sold out when I tried to buy my tickets, so.
Okay.
I will not be partaking in that, but it's a great event, and I hope to see.
And I believe there are still tickets available, so if you haven't gotten your tickets yet, you want to get your tickets.
Yes, lots of
Okay,
fun.
any other reports?
Well, I wanted to let the community know that the C4, the Cross Community Climate Collaborative Riverside team, is meeting on Thursday of next week at the Riverside Public Library at 7 p.m. And these meetings are open to the public, and so if you'd like to come and see, what's going on, you're more than welcome to join us.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Hearing nothing, the board does not have a need for an executive session this evening, so I would like to ask for a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Trustee Gallegos, second.
Second.
Second by Trustee Marshazga. Any further discussions about adjourning? Hearing none. Manager Francis?
Thank you. Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Clarity.
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.